My name is Klaus Richter, and this is a confession I've carried for 79 years. I was 23 years old in the winter of 1943, standing in the frozen hell of Stalingrad with the 6th Army. The cold wasn't just in the air, it was in our bones, in our hearts, in the very marrow of who we'd become. We were German soldiers, the supposed masters of Europe, now reduced to scavenging rats fighting over scraps in the ruins of a dying city. But this story isn't about Stalingrad. Not really. It's about what came after. It's about a man I hated with every fiber of my being, a man who had every reason to let me die, but didn't. His name was David Levin. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand why my hatred burned so hot. I grew up in Munich, in a household where my father wore his Iron Cross from the Great War with pride. After the humiliation of Versailles, after the poverty and chaos of the Weimar years, we were told we'd been betrayed. Stabbed in the back. And we were told who to blame. The Jews. I was young, angry, and looking for answers. The Reich gave me those answers, simple, clean, absolute. We were the victims. They were the parasites. We would be great again, but only if we purged the poison from our midst. I believed it. God help me, I believed every word. When David Levin joined our unit in early 1944, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Here was a Jew, a Mischling, they called him, mixed blood, wearing the same uniform as me. His father had been a decorated officer in the Great War, and through some legal technicality, some bureaucratic oversight, David had been classified as acceptable for military service. To me, it was an abomination. How can they let him serve? I asked my sergeant, Heinrich, a grizzled veteran who'd seen action in Poland and France. Heinrich just shrugged. Orders from above. His papers are in order. The Wehrmacht needs every man it can get. But he's a Jew. He's a soldier, Heinrich said, his voice flat. And right now, we need soldiers more than we need ideology. I couldn't accept it. Every time I saw David, my blood boiled. When he spoke to me, always polite, always respectful, I turned away. When he offered to share his rations during the lean times, I refused. In the barracks, I made sure everyone knew what I thought of him. A traitor among us, I'd say, loud enough for him to hear. A snake wearing our uniform. David never responded. He just did his job, quietly, efficiently, without complaint. He cleaned his rifle, stood his watch, followed orders. He was, by every measure, a better soldier than most of us. And somehow, that made me hate him even more. The truth is, I wanted him to fail. I wanted him to prove me right, to show everyone that Jews were weak, cowardly, unreliable. But he never gave me that satisfaction. We were eventually transferred to Army Group Center, tasked with holding the line against the Soviet advance through Belarus in the summer of 1944. The Red Army was coming like a tidal wave, and we were the sandcastle in its path. It was during the retreat from Minsk that everything changed. Our column was moving through dense forest, trying to reach the regrouping point 30 kilometers west. The Soviets were everywhere, partisan units attacking our flanks, regular army units cutting off our retreat routes. We'd lost half our company in 3 days. Then came the ambush. It started with a single shot, a sniper taking out our lieutenant. Then the forest erupted. Machine gun fire from 3 directions, mortars dropping among us. Men screaming, falling, dying in the mud and pine needles. Fall back. Heinrich was shouting. Back to the tree lean. I was running, my lungs burning, my rifle clutched in shaking hands. An explosion lifted me off my feet and threw me against a tree. My vision went white, then red, then dark around the edges. When I came to, seconds. Minutes. I don't know, I couldn't move my legs. I looked down and saw blood, so much blood, soaking through my trousers. Shrapnel had torn through my right thigh and calf. The pain came then, washing over me in waves that made me scream. The gunfire was moving away. They were leaving me behind. Heinrich. I called out, my voice cracking. Don't leave me. Please. But Heinrich was gone. They were all gone. I could hear Russian voices now, getting closer, moving through the forest to finish off the wounded and collect the weapons. I tried to crawl, digging my fingers into the earth, pulling myself forward. I made it maybe 3 meters before the pain became too much. I collapsed, gasping, tears streaming down my face. This was how I would die. Alone in a Russian forest, shot like a dog by the Soviets. Or worse, captured, sent to Siberia, worked to death in a labor camp. Please, God, I whispered. Please. Then I heard footsteps. Boots crunching on fallen branches. I looked up, expecting to see a Russian soldier standing over me with a rifle. Instead, I saw David Levin. He was breathing hard, his uniform torn, a cut above his eyebrow bleeding into his eye. He was staring down at me with an expression I couldn't read. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. David, I finally croaked. Help me. Please. He didn't move. The Russian voices were getting closer, maybe 200 meters away, working their way through the battlefield. Why should I? His voice was quiet, almost curious. You've made it clear what you think of me, Klaus. Every single day for 6 months. Traitor. Snake. Subhuman. I'd never heard him say that word before, subhuman. Untermensch. My word. The word I'd used to describe him and his kind. I'm sorry, I gasped. I'm sorry, David. Please. I was wrong. I was. You weren't wrong because you believed it, he interrupted. You were wrong because it was a lie. My father bled for Germany. My grandfather died for Germany. I wear this uniform because this is my country too, no matter what you or Hitler or anyone else says. The Russians were close now. I could hear their words, harsh, guttural commands. I know, I said, and I meant it. In that moment, with death approaching, all the propaganda, all the hatred, all the lies just evaporated. I saw him clearly for the first time, not as a Jew, not as an enemy, but as a man. A soldier. A human being who'd shown more courage and dignity than I ever had. I know, I repeated. And I'm sorry. But please. Please don't leave me here. David looked back toward the Russian voices. Then he looked down at me. Something shifted in his face, a decision being made. God help me, he muttered. He grabbed me under the arms and started dragging me. The pain was incredible, like being torn apart from the inside. I bit down on my sleeve to keep from screaming and giving away our position. David pulled me through the underbrush, away from the advancing Russians, toward a small ravine maybe 50 meters away. Every meter felt like a kilometer. I could hear him grunting with effort, his boots slipping in the mud. We reached the ravine just as the Russian voices grew loud behind us. David rolled me into the depression and threw himself down beside me, covering us both with branches and dead leaves. We lay there, pressed into the cold earth, barely breathing. The Russians passed within 10 meters of us. I could see their boots through the gaps in the leaves, worn leather, wrapped in rags for warmth. They were talking, laughing about something. One of them stopped right above us to light a cigarette. I felt David's hand clamp over my mouth. Not rough, not cruel, just firm. Keeping me silent. Keeping me alive. The Russian moved on. The voices faded. We waited an hour, maybe 2, until we were sure they'd passed. Then David pulled away the branches and looked at my leg. It's bad, he said. You've lost a lot of blood. He tore strips from his own shirt and bound my wounds as best he could. His hands were steady, efficient. He'd done this before. I remembered hearing that his father had been a doctor before the Reich stripped him of his license. Can you walk? I shook my head. I don't think so. Then I'll carry you. David, it's 30 kilometers. Then it's 30 kilometers. He fashioned a crude crutch from a branch and got me to my feet, or rather, to my foot. The other leg was useless, dragging behind me. With David supporting my weight, we began to move. I don't know how to describe the next 2 days. Pain, exhaustion, fear, those words don't capture it. David half carried, half dragged me through that forest. When I collapsed, he got me up. When I begged him to leave me, he refused. When I couldn't go on, he told me stories, about his childhood in Hamburg, about his father's medical practice, about the violin lessons his mother had made him take. I was terrible at it, he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Absolutely terrible. My teacher told my mother she was wasting her money. Why'd you keep going? I asked through gritted teeth. Because she believed in me. Even when I didn't believe in myself. At night, we hid in abandoned farmhouses and barns. David found water, scrounged for food. He changed my bandages with strips torn from a dead soldier's uniform. I didn't ask whether the soldier had been German or Russian. On the second night, shivering in a collapsed shed, I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind. Why are you doing this? After everything I said, everything I believed. Why didn't you leave me to die? David was quiet for a long time. Then, because that's what they want, for us to become like them. To let hate win. To treat each other as less than human. He turned to look at me in the darkness. My father taught me that every life is a universe. To save one life is to save the world entire. It's from the Talmud. I don't deserve this. Maybe not. But I'm not doing this for you, Klaus. I'm doing it because of who I choose to be. We reached the German lines on the third day. By then, I was delirious with fever, infection spreading through my leg. David carried me the last 5 kilometers on his back. The sentries almost shot us, 2 mud-covered, barely recognizable figures emerging from the forest. But they saw our uniforms, saw David's papers, and let us through. I woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. They'd amputated my leg below the knee, gangrene had set in. But I was alive. I asked about David immediately. The nurse looked uncomfortable. The Jewish soldier? Yes. Where is he? He was arrested 2 hours after bringing you in. Gestapo. My blood ran cold. What? Why? Someone recognized him. Filed a report. His papers were reviewed more carefully. They found irregularities. I tried to get up, but the nurse pushed me back down. You need to rest, Herr Richter. Where did they take him? She wouldn't answer. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to find out what happened to David Levin. I wrote letters, made inquiries, called in every favor I had. My sergeant Heinrich helped, turned out he'd been moved by what David had done too. We finally got an answer. David had been sent to their Scienstadt, a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. From there, we lost the trail. The war ended 10 months later. I was discharged, sent home to a Munich that no longer existed, not the one I'd known, anyway. Everything was rubble and guilt and terrible revelations about what had been done in our name. I spent years searching for David. I contacted survivor organizations, searched through Red Cross records, traveled to displaced persons camps. Nothing. Then, in 1953, I got a letter. It was from a woman named Rachel Levin, living in Tel Aviv. She was David's sister. David, she wrote, had died in Auschwitz in January 1945, just days before the camp was liberated. He'd survived their Scienstadt but had been transferred to Auschwitz in the final months. He was worked to death in the IG Farben factory, 26 years old, carrying stones until his body gave out. But Rachel wanted me to know something. Before David was arrested, he'd written a letter to his family, smuggled out by a sympathetic nurse. In it, he'd told them about me. About carrying a wounded soldier through the forest. About choosing mercy over hate. He wrote that if he died, Rachel's letter said, he wanted us to know that he'd lived as a human being. That he'd never let them take that from him. He wanted you to know that too. I wept when I read those words. I wept for David. I wept for all the people like him, millions of them, who'd been murdered because of lies I'd believed, hatred I'd carried. I'm 97 years old now. I've spent the last 70 years trying to make amends, speaking in schools, telling this story, bearing witness to both the evil we committed and the goodness that survived despite us. People ask me sometimes what I learned from David Levin. That's easy. I learned that a man's worth isn't found in his blood or his religion or his race. It's found in his choices, in what he does when everything would be easier, when everything would be justified, when no one would blame him for choosing hate. David Levin wore the uniform of a nation that wanted him dead. He served alongside men who despised him. And when he had every reason to walk away, to leave his tormentor to die, he chose differently. He chose to be human. He saved a world that day, my world. And in doing so, he proved that even in the darkest times, even when evil seems to have won, there is still light. Still mercy. Still love. I carry his memory with me every day. His sacrifice. His dignity. His unbreakable spirit. And I pray, to a God I'm not sure forgives me, that I've lived the rest of my life in a way that honors what David gave me. Not just life. But a reason to live.